When we recall the 2016 Philippine elections, one of the biggest issues at the time was the role social media played in the election. We're talking about, of course, the spread of disinformation on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. There's no denying social media had a huge influence on the outcome of the 2016 elections.
I think that was the year that we really saw the beginnings of social media as a formidable force in elections. In the Philippines, you could really see that one of the most distinctive characteristics of digital disinformation is that it was predominantly run by people coming from a background of advertising and public relations, and also some previous journalists. But what they did was to kind of hyperextend the techniques that they have learned in the media industries and apply that to politics.
Here's what the disinformation mechanism looked like in 2016. At the top, you had former advertising and public relations executives who were the chief architects of disinformation. These experienced media professionals came up with political campaigns. Then, anonymous influencers on social media were in charge of turning these messages into posts and comments that resonate with Filipinos. Examples of this included the use of Becky language and the use of pop culture. And at the bottom, you had the copy-paste trolls, whose only job was to amplify these messages. And it worked.
The scary part, actually, is that these disinformation producers are creating this environment for engagement, and there are people who actually engage, but the kind of engagement that they create is very toxic, vitriolic, full of hatred, diba? Misogyny, racism, all of that. And it tends to really fire up people. And that's where the problem lies.
And this problem is really only getting worse. With the 2022 elections less than a year away, it's almost campaign season again. Academics warn of an intensification of the social media storm of 2016. Here are some of the trends we can expect this time around. The first is a change in strategy from an all-out assault on Facebook to communication toward more specific groups of people, or micro-targeting.
If in 2016 we were seeing this information on our newsfeed, I think increasingly they're moving away from that and moving towards yung mga group chats, or the Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, Viber groups. What we were seeing then was these very vulnerable groups like the flat earthers, yung mga anti-vaxxers, OFWs also. Maybe because they're outside the country, they don't really have a full sense of the dynamic that's going on here. So it's easy to sell particular narratives to them.
The second trend, algorithm is king. People are increasingly taking advantage of non-political social media algorithms to spread fake news.
So the people behind this are not ad and PR people. They are technopreneurs. They're trying to earn money out of their technological know-how, their technological expertise. And they're trying to make a buck out of that through the use of algorithms. Some of them have collaborations with either with different kinds of political camps. Then, so we were beginning to see that happening.
But production of fake news is not the only thing that will change in 2022. Audiences are also changing. In recent years, they've developed deep stories. These are stories in people's heads that they use to interpret any political information they encounter.
One of the things that we're beginning to see is that a lot of the people, ang deep story nila is that they don't like whiners. They don't like people who just keep on complaining about everything. They want, parang gusto nila is just, the government is doing its work, so let's just do what we have to do and support the government. Something like that. That's a bit scary because I think the opposition needs to think about how they tailor their messages, because if they keep on just complaining and pointing out the things that are wrong, they're really falling into this narrative, this deep story that they are whiners and they're not worth putting into office.
So the question for 2022 becomes, how do we avoid falling into the trap of these deep stories? How can we re-engineer our messages to really get past them? Current strategies include fact-checking and media literacy training. But is this enough?
And it's important. Fact-checking is important. Media literacy is important. I'm not saying that they're not. In fact, I help in these initiatives of fact-checking and media literacy. But I keep on saying it's not enough. People who have particular deep stories, when they encounter facts, they're like, I don't care. It doesn't resonate with how I see the world. So you can keep fact-checking all you want. I'm not going to listen to you. I have my own way of looking at the world. And so you see the limits of fact-checking there.
So the point here is, techniques like fact-checking only work on people with neutral opinions, which unfortunately is not the case for most in 2022. This means journalists will have to go beyond reporting information in the lead up to election day. They will have to really frame their reports and not in a neutral way. It's about time the Philippine media acknowledged their biases. But media is not limited to the news media. It is a spectrum, including the entertainment media.
Stories are shaped by these broader stories that we tell about our society, and entertainment media are super crucial to that.
So when it comes to countering deep stories in people's minds, it's clear that hard selling doesn't work anymore. The use of entertainment media like films and TV shows can be much more effective in making people rethink their deep stories. Here's an example.
So many people really believe, maybe because it's been such a long time ago, that martial law was a good thing. It was the golden age of the Philippines. And it might be hard to counter that with facts. But if we have movies, we have TV series that show the reality of martial law, and not in a hard sell kind of way, that eventually will shape the minds of people. It will remind them of how was it during the martial law.
Now let's talk solutions. The first thing we will need for 2022 is campaign finance regulation.
We need to really hold politicians accountable in terms of who they hire for their campaigns, and especially now for the social media campaigns. Rather than address the issue of regulation in terms of censorship, address the financial element of it. Who are you paying to do your campaigns? And I think that will make it harder for politicians and also harder for disinformation producers to do this kind of dirty work, because it will be revealed if they do something like this.
Second, we have to advocate self-regulation in the ad and PR industries.
The industry needs to self-regulate what campaigns it accepts or not. So they need to think about that a bit harder. The digital influencers also need to self-regulate.
Third, we need to protect our digital workers.
We've been trying to push for social safety nets for our digital workers so that they're not tempted to do disinformation work.
And lastly, when we tell stories in the lead up to the 2022 election, we have to cut across the divide. If you don't fall into one established category, you're in the clear.
Vico Soto was doing some very good things in Pasig. And the trolls trained their attention on Vico. They tried to attack him, right? But he doesn't fit the Dilawan DDS divide. And so they didn't really know how to frame their attacks against Vico. And they spectacularly failed.
2022 might sound far away right now, but it's much closer than we think. It is time now more than ever to consider these strategies and regain control of our own elections.